Okay, good morning. Not good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our quarterly IDEA webinar addressing DEIA fatigue, re-energizing your organization. My name is Maria Hasso, and I am Alliance's Public Policy and Communications Specialist. And today we are very pleased to welcome an IDEA expert and actual founder of Alliance's IDEA Committee, Nick Manning, to speak to us a little bit more on DEIA fatigue. Dr. Nicholas Manning is the owner and sole proprietor for Manning Coaching and Consulting. There, Nick serves as a coach both in personal or professional accountability and support. Additionally, he serves organizations in a consultant role through employee and organizational development. Prior to this recent change, he served as the director for people operations at Support Inc., helping support folks in the IDD community. So you might know Nick. He's spoken at a number of Alliance events, both at our annual summit and in webinars like this. It's always a pleasure to have him speak, so I will turn it over to him. Thanks so much, Nick.
Thank you. It has definitely been an honor to be a part of our IDEA efforts. I have grown tremendously, so I'm glad anytime that I get a chance to share some of what I've come across, what I've learned in the process. So today we are going to talk about DEIA fatigue. A little bit. Go over our agenda today. So you get to meet me. Yay. Brief introduction to the topic. We're going to call to action. So why is it important that we do something? Provide some definition and some clarity around DEIA fatigue, why it happens, how it's visible, what some primary goals, and then opportunities to challenge the status quo. So again, all the stuff that Maria said, I have had the opportunity to get to do more of this work with organizations in the IDD space. So I look forward to continuing to partner with folks throughout our organizations. So if you ever have a need, request, etc., let me know. So in 2020, most of us entered the IDEA space, the diversity, equity, inclusion space. And really what's happened since then is the work it has over a general consensus viewed for some insight into why the global experience of DEIA fatigue has occurred. And so one, we're going to look at that. We're going to address it, provide maybe some tips to be able to work through it. But we want to be able to push through initial phases of cultural sustainable efforts. A little bit of a timeline. There's only five pieces to this slide, so it is not all encompassing, but just getting some back thought and backstory about a lot of the things that have occurred over time. So in 1865, Congress established the Freedmen's Bureau. The Freedmen's Bureau provided food, shelter, medical services, land to displaced Blacks from the South, whose prior status as enslaved people left them without economic means, legal protection, etc., and were very vulnerable to physical and financial hardship in the South, especially. It also established schools, supervised contract, managed confiscated and abandoned lands. In 1872, it closed due to opposition from Southerners. So we'll be able to identify a little bit about how some of those actions and activities back then are continued and revolved and reflected in some of today's pushback. The 13th Amendment outlawed slavery. It left folks without the legal right to vote, to own property, etc. So the Civil Rights Act was activated in almost a century later. What that did was it offered protection and established citizenship for emancipated folks who are of African American descent. Really, what happened is now that Black folks were able to own land, to be able to create and enforce contracts, to sue, So to be able to engage in rightful and legal litigation when wronged, which had never been the case before. Uh, President Johnson opposed that legislation, arguing that it was discrimination against the majority, specifically against whites, and then Congress overrode it with a veto in 1877. So even though folks were presumed to be free, they had no legal rights, and you can kind of see how that efforts are again visible today. So fast forward nearly a century, African Americans remained largely locked out of skilled workforce till 1960, when the Department of Labor found that Black workers make 60% less than average to their white colleagues. Meanwhile, the modern civil rights movement was continuing to gain movement, to gain focus, to gain fellowship, to gain support, particularly in the South, as it challenged segregation. And then the landmark case of Brown versus Board of Education led to the desegregation of schools. So if you can think about the beginning of slavery and colonization in the late 1400s on this land, and it took to 1961 for folks to be able to enter schools with people of different racial identification. Really, from there, affirmative action was signed into law and really has been under fire since its successful challenge in the Supreme Court last year. A variety of states, different places had signed executive orders to reduce the effectiveness of affirmative action, in some places making it non-applicable. Until 2020. So I think all of us probably can remember 2020 with great detail. It was extremely hard on all of us as a collective whole. There was a lot of trauma that occurred and often sparked around George Floyd's murder and the subsequent protests that sparked really a rush of executive and boardrooms to commit financially to diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility programs. And in 2020 alone, it was estimated about $7.5 billion were put into those programs to hire staff, to make sure that there were chief DEI officers that were able to oversee systematic change at the organizational level until the DEI backpedal began in June 2023, when the Supreme Court ruled that racial identifiers were no longer expected in the public education system, in government sector, and other organizations across the country. So really a huge push has been emphasized since 1865 when the Emancipation Proclamation went into effect. Really, the opportunity to have a fair seat at the table for BIPOC communities didn't occur until almost 100 years later. And then even when it did in different pockets in different states, it wasn't recognized. And up to today. So I think we all believe that we are more equipped to handle diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility efforts in 2024 than we were in 1960. As evidenced by some of the responses at the Supreme Court level. I don't know that that's true yet, and definitely in some areas. So with that being said, the task that we have is extremely important. So calling to action, all of us here, to be able to continue to make change, to do so to create change, you or we must be willing to persevere through our own sense of futility to achieve something bigger than ourselves. Inclusivity for people with disabilities and the countless staff who support them. As leaders in supporting adults through all of the complexities of the human experience, we are expected to serve people in their own entirety. So not just people with a diagnosis, but every facet of who they are and how they identify. So that puts DEI efforts on the forefront. It's a luxury to be able to put it on the back burner, and one that we can't really afford to do. So how do we do that? Especially when we experience something called DEI fatigue. You may or may not be aware of it. So I want to be able to take an opportunity to kind of reset the conversation. So the definition of DEIA fatigue, or at least one definition, is people's general resistance to talking about these issues. This can be especially common at the organizational level, and that talks a lot about DEI without doing very much to set a strategic goal or to really implement any effective change. I hear that quite a bit as we move through not only this conversation, but I've moved through some previous ones of well, what have we done already? What even hurts more sometimes is, well, what have you done already? You, as in the folks representing the DEIA efforts at your organization, at the alliance level, at the legislative level, et cetera. It's looked at as the responsibility of few to impact the many, which, you guessed it, can lead to extra fatigue on our part. We have some opportunities for growth, and I thought a few of these quotes were super impactful from Stephanie Conversion. The way DEI fatigue has largely been framed is we are tired of talking about race and we want to focus on other kinds of diversity. There seems to be fatigue around addressing the impacts of race and racism, particularly anti-Black racism. And what is positioned as fatigue is simply pushback against having difficult and honest conversations about how people with racialized or minoritized identities are experiencing an organizational culture versus the dominant identity group. So despite having access to data demonstrating these disparities exist, we find ourselves continuing to have to reinvent the conversation to get buy-in, which can tire you out, absolutely. At its core, DEI fatigue embodies two distinct narratives. On one side, there is a tireless, so DEIA advocates, continuously pushing for change, often with limited resources and against tremendous institutional inertia. These champions are genuinely exhausted, seeking meaningful support and understanding amidst an often isolating battle. Another source of exhaustion is the burden of coaching and educating colleagues who have privileged identities and tiptoeing around difficult conversations. I know personally I've experienced this quite a bit. I also know I have been a person that has been tired of dealing with DEI-focused conversations. We all have privilege. If you've ever heard from me previously, our privilege is on an axis. The people that we serve, we have an inherent power over as we oversee their resources. We oversee their housing. We oversee their vouchers. We oversee their Social Security income. We have power over the caregivers that we have within our system, as well as the employees maybe that we supervise, we work under, we work for, et cetera. All of those kind of things. We have opportunities to dip in and out of difficult conversations, difficult opportunities to better ourselves, because oftentimes the work feels too much. It feels too big. So Dana Singh had provided some ways that we can re-energize, but first, how do we look at it? So here's a couple of variables at play here. So kind of go over each one individually. So identify the cause or causes of fatigue, create a clear plan of action, boost enthusiasm through some short-term goals, garner support from the C-suite or your executive leadership group, measure progress, and foster collaboration and participation. So first and foremost, we want to pinpoint the cause of fatigue. So you can ask yourself this individually, or you can ask yourself in your department, your organization, the industry, the world. We can get big if we like to, but really just take a chance if you can to take a look at just for you. So if you're feeling a little bit of fatigue, and or when you do feel fatigued and having conversations that are around race, racism, sexism, ableism, etc., where do you feel it at? And what does it look like? So before changing our approach, we want to be able to make sure that we have the resources necessary to do so. It's important to understand how the fatigue happens in our workplace. So there's a little bit of a checklist that we can utilize to address when the momentum stops. So first, do we have support from our leadership group? And is it active? So nods of approval is not support, it's allowance. People are allowing us to move forward. That can't be acceptable for cultural change. For cultural change to occur, it has to start from the top and has to flow to the bottom, and then it has to be reciprocated back up. A culture is an entire entity. It is not solely a few people doing some pretty good stuff here. And I think if you've had a long enough professional career, you've experienced a really healthy, person-centered, employee supportive culture, and you've experienced one where that's not really held, where vulnerability isn't portrayed, accountability is not appreciated, and individualism is ignored. So I think we've all been at some of those. One, are you in it now? Two, are you in it sometimes? And three, does your organization do a pretty good job with where that's at? And if it does a pretty good job of where it's at, that means that leadership has an active role in ensuring that DEIA efforts are fulfilled, that they're accountable, they are in action, and they're intertwined with organizational goals. Are you specifically short on time or resources? And or maybe the team that you have around you? And is there only a few of you doing a lot of work? So as you can see, I know in organizations that I've been a part of and worked for, your DEI group dwindles because people have to focus on their, quote, real job, end quote, which to me can be really insulting for the folks that have made this a part of their day-to-day job, that it's not something that I do on the side. It's something that's intertwined with every action that I take and the job that I provide or the work that I provide for others. So making sure that we're not rushed to make decisions, that we're not rushed to push through initiatives, that we have the time and diligence to be able to ensure that what we're producing is quality left. So making sure that's really a big focus. I extremely encourage that. And on an organizational level, how many people do you have for the work that's necessary? Making sure that you're really taking a head count of are we equipped with enough people to perform what's necessary to have systematic change, to have organizational cultural change? And if not, what's the right number? And then advocating for those resources and that support from your leadership group. From there, going back up to the first part about active support, we have a cultural issue. So maybe you're struggling to convey the importance of DEI at the workplace, or in general as a whole. Maybe that's a lack of your own personal skill set. Maybe you're new to the journey. Maybe you know and recognize that you come from a place of privilege and aren't sure if that's your place to really push this effort. All of those things can really wear on you, and it's something that you'll want to address or to make sure that you're equipped to do so. It's crucial to have a good understanding of the root causes of your organization and our industry and how we experience DEI fatigue. There are a few, so not all, but there are a few identifiable cause of diversity fatigue. So first, doesn't it feel like we have endless amount of work ahead of us? It sure does, for my opinion, that's for sure, from my scope. Oftentimes this work requires a significant amount of time. There's a lot to do. And if we're really, most of our organizations, and most organizations around the United States landscape, started this work or really got into this work over the last 4 years. Due to those events and recognizing that the need and the spark for change was necessary. And to do so, there hasn't been a lot of really strong models of success. So looking at the amount of work that's ahead of us and the amount of time and resources we have to move that needle, and recognizing that this work will never be done. So because we're actively working against a system that is moving forward while we're trying to change it, we'll always leave a hole or a group of people who aren't supported or identified and recognized and amplified appropriately. So in our minds, we can take that as a cue to know that this is going to be continuous work towards equity, accessibility, inclusivity, and diversity. because the human experience and condition is continuing to change, and embracing that as growth opportunities. It's also really important to know that this work will take an emotional toll. Most of you probably feel it when you're working with folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities. A quote from a former colleague was, "No one would come to us if things were going well, right? No one would be in our services if they didn't need the support to live a fruitful and inclusive life, right? To be able to be involved and intertwined within their community. So folks wouldn't come to us if they had it already, or if our system were built in a way that helps support folks with a variety of needs. With that means that you're holding something. You're holding the trauma of the system for that person or that family. You're holding the trauma of discrimination that has occurred over and over, and countless unsafe situations, both physically and emotionally, that people within our services have endured. That takes a lot. And change agents are required to confront a lot of issues, specifically with the people that we serve. But also, if you're subscribed to the DEIA efforts, you're going to be asked to call on issues related to race, sexism, homophobia, ableism, etc. And the effort of confrontation will take an emotional toll, regardless of how much you know about the topic, how strong you feel about it. That is emotional inertia that you can't get back. Countering bias or discrimination will definitely lead to frustration, anger, resentment, emotional stress, solitude, as well as maybe confusion. Did I get it right? Do I have a leg to stand on in this conversation? So then you're going to use more mental and emotional energy to be able to get you where you need to get to in some of those really difficult conversations. And maybe they happen with people you really care about, and you're recognizing that their perspective no longer aligns with yours, and how damaging that can be to your own emotional and mental space. And finally, like most of us know, change takes time, which is not something we want to hear. DI efforts are a result in change. It's often going to be slow. It won't be readily visible, and especially to people who are skeptical of its impact, right? If you don't fully believe in something, you will take an opportunity to be able to challenge the desired effort of that group if you don't see the benefit. When was the last time you did something for me? When was that effort or that challenge can really be difficult for folks to be able to push through. And then what it will do is it will cause change agents to feel that our effort was wasted. Why do we even do that? And then subsequently, that could lead to turnover of folks within that DEIA space, within your team, or maybe in leadership positions across the industry. Now we're losing some really strong voices to be able to ensure that this work gets moved forward, because we're working against a system that's actively pushing back, has more resources, has more time, built-in subscribers to it, people that are benefiting from the system as is. And how do we change the minds of people that are getting what they need to help support people that don't? That is an uphill battle, which is absolutely clear. So first and foremost, you want to create an action plan. So as someone that is not structured, I don't create structure well, but having structure around it really helps you know and feel focused on your DEI journey. So like I said, it's not a destination, it's a process. So to create the action plan, it's important to be able to identify roadblocks, to create step-by-step action plans with identifiable goals, so that you know, if I create this effort, this is the desired outcome or objective. Defining what strategies are necessary to be able to achieve those goals, and to address the roadblocks, and resources that are needed. If we had what we needed to get where we want to go, we would be there already. So identifying what we need to be able to get there is super important, because that helps create systematic change, especially if it's something that we can keep in the fold long term. We identify what it is, we address it, we keep the resources there in place so that we can continue the momentum moving forward. and ideally maybe prevent some of the issues that we have previously experienced because we've created an intentional plan. Short-term goals, so they're really important. So I know a lot of us would really like to see some things over the next few years to be able to create really good, hardy, core foundational movement. And even though it is important that we strategize for the big picture, for systematic changes to occur, it's a tough sell. So short-term goals, one, are easier for people to digest, are oftentimes contributors to long-term success, but also rewards people doing the really good effort. So create stepping stones towards larger objectives. So if we have this place that we want to be at with our DEIA efforts, in 2025, we have some strategic goals to get there. What are some steps to get there? And how do we identify and count them as wins? Those are visible changes that without that identification as a stepstone toward a larger objective would be overseen and also will create to the lack of momentum. We're not really seeing progress. One, because we're not looking for it. We're not looking for the systematic stepstones that are necessary for big change because we haven't identified them yet. So we're running past it. And until we see this change at this level for this thing, we didn't make it. But if we're able to break those up into stepping stones, it provides us with enthusiasm around our DEI efforts. It creates solidarity around that. It creates positive intention when we see that we have been successful and maybe something that was really, really challenging on our way to something else. That really makes it easier to identify, makes it easier to implement, and much easier to track when we're breaking it down to bite-sized pieces. And to do that, what it will do is it creates a sense of accomplishment, which you all probably know helps us stay motivated. If we feel like we're achieving things on the way to this grand goal, we're more likely to maintain or keep ourselves in that race. Request and advocate. We need leadership support. So regardless of what organization you're with, if you are not the end-all be-all decision maker, you need help and support from people that are making organizational decisions. Because, like I said before, cultural change only occurs when we're bought in at the people with the most power. So really, those people need to make sure that they're diving in and being a part of some of those conversations. And we need to be able to feel comfortable advocating for their support. Our organizational change management capability may have all the other enterprise change agent management elements in place, but without C-level change leadership, we will continue to struggle deliverable, broad-reaching, successful change. You just can't get there if it's stuck at the front lines or middle management, et cetera, or in pockets of the organization. These departments do it really good. These ones don't. Without a really all-encompassing push from the top down and again from the bottom up, our change will get stalled, and that will really wear on the folks heading up these efforts. I think we've all heard if you can't measure it, you can't improve it, or we won't know that we can improve it. You have to be really careful when it comes to data collection because of the sensitivity around the topics within DEIA. Most of the folks who have been marginalized or discriminated against, to be able to summarize experiences in a quantitative fashion can really make people feel small or can re-traumatize folks. We're seen as a piece to this pie, but not really as a human experiencing challenges because of our identity. And remembering that not all data is created equal. To be actionable and to have a chance of influencing behavior, information needs to be legible to the intended audience. Means by that is if people around the organization can't digest what we're measuring, it's not impactful. It's not going to create change if the majority of people are confused about what we're doing, how it's visible, what does that look like, how do I read it, how do I implement it in my job? What does it do for me? we're not able to explain that, hear from our staff, and make it palatable, essentially we're just doing business work. We're not making change. We're playing house. So remember, DEIA efforts are everyone's. It is not the sole objective of the folks leading that group to make organizational decisions or change. They are resources. They are dedicated resources, both in knowledge and in effort, to help support organizational or systematic change. But it's not just their fight. We also want to make sure that we're mapping the network connections across departments and organizations. How do we connect and how do we stay connected so that we can support each other through systematic changes, that we can foster accountability? Can't do that. It's really making sure that we are focused on how we connect throughout our organizations. Also, make sure you're mapping outside of your organization. Some of the best relationships I've had the opportunity of building in my professional career, especially as of late, was being a part of the IDEA committee. Not only have I met colleagues that I will work with, have worked with, but met some really supportive friendships, really, that will help push my efforts forward, even after career changes or the audience becomes different. And you really need that rallying focus, because in the end, regardless of what organization that we're with or we're tied to, we are all focused on improving the lives of others. And so utilizing and encouraging those connections to really make industry-wide changes is important. Go deeper into identity. Countless times I've heard people, they fumble through the LGBTQ plus identity or recognition, because when does it end? I hear that often. When does it end? As long as the human experience continues to evolve, people will continue to identify in new ways that make sense for them. So don't stop at the outer crust. We really have to get into the center of what identity is. How does it look? One, allowing space for people to explain themselves and be recognized for who they are, but also having the courage to be able to help people within our services learn who they are, connect with their identity, and foster that support. Finally, change the conversation. So you don't always have to enter the room with the same intention as you did before, just because you come from a place of privilege. So you might want to encourage the participation in employee resource groups or affinity groups. Some people might hear it from there. What that does, it creates opportunity for open dialogue and feedback from folks with a variety of experiences to be able to bring back and create opportunities for change. Additionally, it shows that we celebrate people and their unified identity and not ostracize folks for connecting with people who look like them, sound like them, talk like them. People who do not benefit from the status quo must unite and overcome our internalized oppression and isms about each other, because we make up the majority. Really, there are more people that want to see inclusivity, diversity, equity, and inclusion win. However, what happens is we don't express that. We don't express the pushback of oppression and the isms that come with it. It's really, and I appreciated this quote from Karen Fleshman, this includes white women who form the majority of DEIA practitioners and executives, as well as HR leaders. Are we aware of what that looks like? Our folks who identify as white women understand their place here. And that's just an example from a white woman through the words and eyes of her experience, but really encapsulating that sense of, hey, take a look at yourself. And without my view, so me specifically, I am a cis hetero male. I subscribe to all the masculine things, love sports, football, blah, 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 all that stuff. Am I as loud, or do I insert myself appropriately in the identification of folks who see themselves or feel different about their gender or sexual identity or et cetera. And if I'm not doing that in a position of power, especially as an organizational leader or someone that can come and help support organizations through their change, then I'm a part of the problem. So really, joining and recognizing that folks with different identities are in the same community as me, that we are in the community of change, and externalize some of that efforts can really create some positive momentum. How do we think about taking a risk when maybe we're feeling fatigued with DA? So when white cisgendered women, for example, unlearn our racism and internalize sexism, we will be able to unite with BIPOC, queer, trans, and non-binary people. We will have the number and power we need to change every institution in our society. But as long as fill in the blank allegiance to really the white supremacist culture that has kind of indoctrinated us and where we are, we'll remain mired in the mess. And I think that's really important for us to recognize because, if you're not pushing back on the system, you're compliant in it. And that part is hard, I think, because sometimes I just want to take a nap, or I want to go outside and have a good time with my kids, or whatever your answer might be. Essentially, we're fatigued, we're tired. And sometimes your privilege allows you to step in and step out more often than others. But it doesn't mean that you can't stay back in and do things right for yourself, that you continue to be able to push DEIA efforts forward. Keep it up. So keep pushing. Accept that change is a part of life. Acknowledge what has already been accomplished. Maintain presence and perspective. Focus on what you can control. Build a positive support network. Challenge yourself to keep learning. All of us within this audience have a sense of privilege, especially in the place that we're working, because of the population that we're serving. It's really important to continue to evolve. Just being in our position doesn't make us experts on intellectual and developmental disabilities. Information and knowledge is growing and changing all the time. Are we doing the necessary things to be able to make sure that we are recognizing folks in the IDD space in a way that is empowering to them? Or are we just kind of going off the knowledge that we have? Do we have a support network in the office, outside of the office, that will help hold us accountable and help motivate us to continue to make change? Do we pay attention to things that we can't control? Are we there? Are we present? Are we in this space and offering perspective? Do we ever give feedback and reaffirming or confirming response to some of the action items that we've already accomplished? You have done really good work, I can guarantee it. Sometimes it's appropriate to give yourself a pat on the back for things that you did a while ago. One, it reminds you that you're in it, that you've done some good things, but that your time wasn't wasted. And we all must accept that changing, our cultures are going to change. Estimations of what racial makeup will look like across this country will be significantly different in the next 10 to 15 years, as well as the religious identification and the power structure within that. The world will change whether we want it to or not. So accepting that, and then what can we do about it, doesn't feel as scary. Some positive outcomes that can occur, which I think is super important. So if you're a resilient leader, which means, I'm going to stay in this effort and I'm going to push through to get to where we need to get to, are more likely to utilize inclusive activities or to nurture inclusive cultures. Workforce resilience leaders are more likely to utilize and review recruitment policies to ensure inclusion, and more likely to promote talent from underrepresented groups into senior level roles than folks who aren't subscribed to the DEIA focus and don't find resiliency in continuing to push. Both of those items I just suggested were above 60% compared to their peers who don't subscribe to that or aren't as resilient within the DEIA space. who recognize it about 30% of the time. Workforce resilient leaders who make DEI a priority are more likely to report employee satisfaction and well-being, and improved significantly from about 40% of their peers to about 55 and 60% for the folks they serve. So you can see, if we as leaders, regardless of what role or position that you're in, if you're subscribing to this, you remain resilient, you keep pushing through, the experience that people have around you elevates nearly 20% compared to people that don't. I also see an influx in productivity from 35% to about 70%. So in the end, it makes business sense to be able to continue to push through the DEI fatigue, and looking at ways that we can minimize it. So in the end, recognizing that DEI fatigue can be avoided when organizations lean into the fact that DEI initiatives had tangible benefit for employers, for the talent that we bring in, for the community at large, and don't shy away from recognizing that the positive business outcomes that diversity, equity, and inclusion has is better for us than if we shy away from those efforts. What we will see is a supportive workforce. We'll see enhanced problem-solving capabilities, reduced turnover, and increased retention, which I know that I've been a part of staffing conversations in this space for years and years. So really taking a look at how can we utilize DEIA efforts to really impact the desire to stay. Studies have suggested, especially younger generations, go to work with people who offer diversity. We want to go and work with people that don't look like us, sound like us, talk like us, because we want to grow. We don't want to feel as comfortable as maybe we would at home or with our families. That's the intention of folks often to go be a part of organizations specifically around DEIA efforts. It also provides economic support because it improves business outcomes. So DEIA makes sense in a variety of ways. And being able to continue to address and recognize when we're tired, when fatigue has set in both individually and organization-wide, is important. So if we don't recognize that we're tired, take opportunities to step out and rejuvenate and step back in. We're not really being change agents. Okay, we're picking and choosing when to use our privilege. So attached to this, these are just some readings that I thought were super important, or maybe just a little important. Maybe super was a little strong with how I utilized it. But feel free to be able to utilize some of these. I will make sure that they're saved and our Alliance folks have them. So with that, I would like to offer the floor for questions, comments, concerns.
So somebody is jumping in. Hi, Nick.
Hi.
It's Tara from Community Connections. I have to say, this was so timely and perfect. Today, I am working with an organization, not Community Connections. We're totally on top of things, but a volunteer organization where I've been working on DEI efforts for over 15 years. And it just feels like we keep having to fight the same fight over and over and over again. Like, we win some support, we win some funding, and then a couple years later, new people come in, and we're fighting the exact same fight over and over and over again. And it is exhausting. And as you said, as the white cisgendered woman, I often will try to kind of put myself between the other women of color that are part of our group so that they're not having to bear so much of the brunt. And that gets exhausting as well. Yeah, and it does sometimes feel like, okay, I am not giving up the fight. Do I want to do the fight here? Right? Like, is this the place for me to be having an impact? So I don't know if that's not really a question, just kind of
Well,
on,
it's not,
yeah,
but I
how do
think
you
that
know
experience
when
is probably shared for sure. For
shift,
sure.
shift my efforts somewhere else where I can make an impact? Yeah.
Yeah, I really like that you highlighted the competing emotional efforts, right? Of staying in it and being a change agent who recognizes their privilege, that it's my responsibility to step into these conversations, while also what I'm doing isn't working. And I'm tired of doing the thing for people that maybe don't want or appreciate the thing. And, where to go with that. And I think the complexity of that is real. And I encourage people that regardless of what room you enter with what privilege, that it's okay to reflect and it's okay to recognize that it's hard. It is difficult to push back against people with an agenda, miseducation, lack of resources, all of that. There's a lot at play here. And sometimes we won't have it. And I think it's important. I actually just had this conversation with a group before we got on about recognizing what your fatigue looks like, because one of our wonderful colleagues, Liz Schmidt, invited me to a training over at Lairdon this week or previously, and talked about self-care for advocacy. And we're all in a sense of privilege, so use our folks in our services. Many of us don't. So relating to the folks within our can be pretty different. And we're able to dip out sometimes or address with vigor, but we're not really helping. That's I'm done with all of it, and it's no longer becoming a conversation. It's argumentative. I got to win, and that's a recognition for me of, wow, like I am tired and I don't have the access to my tools, or maybe don't even have the appropriate tools to be impactful, because we have to take care of ourselves for the long haul. We don't do this effort justice if we burn out in 6 months, especially when we have privilege. So for the folks that we're serving, for example, if we aren't taking care of ourselves, we're not intentional about our efforts and our advocacy, what good does it do to people on our caseload if we leave in 6 months? And someone else has to kind of pick up where we were off, or where our efforts were, and start over. What does that communicate to the people that really need advocacy? It communicates that that we weren't enough to stick through, that we were a task, right, and not a community, that you didn't recognize us as you, right? It wasn't a reflective effort. That part was really impactful when I went through and had some of that discussion, because self-care, I'm really good at encouraging others to take care of themselves. I'm not always great with doing it for myself, and then I'll crash. So I'll run hot for a really long time, and then I'll drop some stuff. Most people don't need me to run that much. They don't need me plowing through life to kick butt for everything. They need me for the next 10 years to do it systematically and intentionally. That's when the change is going to happen. Not necessarily that I win an argument against someone who is prejudiced, etc. That's one person win. That's not systematic change. So how do I continue to bring in, maybe mark that conversation, because that's probably something that more people feel, and then bring it to an audience, a bigger audience, to address it. Maybe that impact is larger. Save that for when I have time and attention to be able to do that, which is super hard, especially for a lot of us who are pushing at systematic challenges. That's why we do the work that we do, because the system itself hasn't done it. So we're stepping in. So how do we now do it in a way that preserves our energy for the long haul, because I really want to be there a day when we really get to shift our focus to someone or something else. That will be great. I want to see that day. It won't happen if I don't take care of myself or I'm not intentional about it. So I think what you're saying is spot on, spot on. Great. Any other thoughts, comments, questions before I let you have the rest of your nice-ish day outside before whatever's going to happen tomorrow, Armageddon or something? Get your milk and toilet paper now. Just kidding. Just kidding. We don't want to go through that again, do we, people? Oh, great. I will. So I will put my email in the chat for folks. If you have questions or comments, you want to reach out to me, you can. I know that I'll be sending this over to Maria and make it available, which will also have my contact information. So if you want to chat about it, you have some thoughts, etc., let me know.
Nice. Yeah, I just wanted to thank Nick. At the end of it, it kind of seemed like an idea committee meeting as well too, and I miss having those. So I just wanted to let everyone know too that we do have an idea committee that I mentioned that Nick started a few years ago, and we meet monthly. So if you're interested in joining something like that, this is honestly exactly what the discussions are a lot of the time during it. So it seems to be really helpful for everyone involved. So send me an email. I will send out the slides, and the recording will be available as well. But just nice to see Nick again and to see you all here. So thank you so much and have a great evening.
Appreciate you all. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.